are going to tell us a little bit about their areas, the collections that they look after. And then after that, we will have our speed dating opportunity. Now, those of you who have been in touch with my colleagues Rebecca or Yasmin in advance of the event, which I think will be all of you from the university side, will have had the opportunity to sign up for an appointment with a curator. Some of you have done that and some haven't, and that's fine. It might be that you want to hear what people have got to say before you kind of stick your flag in the sand. All the curators have spaces available. I think we've got time for 4 slots each. So those of you that have pre-chosen, you will be allocated a slot with the curator that you have chosen on the doodle that Rebecca sent you. Those of you that haven't yet chosen, if as we go through the session, you could put in the chat which curator you'd like to talk to, then Rebecca will be able to allocate you a slot. I'll say a bit more about the technicality of how that will work after we've done all the other bits, so that everybody remembers when it's about to happen. So without further ado, I will hand over to Yvonne.
Hello, everybody. I'm just wondering where are the slides available?
I can share my screen for the presentation if you like, Yvonne, and you can tell me when to click onwards.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, I'm the head of collections and programs at Leeds Museums and Galleries. So really good to see people who are joining us today, along with my colleagues, who will all be, as Erica said, telling you a bit more about their area of the collection and kind of current interests and where perhaps there might be an opportunity for a collaboration through this project. Oh yes, there we go. So that's me. If we can carry on, John. So Leeds Museums and Galleries, we are part of Leeds City Council, and we run 9 museums and galleries around the city, which you can see, I think, a depiction of, yes, all of them here. So we have our 2 city centre sites, Leeds Art Gallery and Leeds City Museum. We've got Thwaite Watermill and Leeds Industrial Museum, 2 country houses, Temple Newsam and Lotherton. We have Abbey House Museum and Kirkstall Abbey across the road from there. And we have Leeds Discovery Centre, which is on the bottom right of the screen there. So collections wise, we essentially look after the city's collections on behalf of the people of Leeds. We have a sort of encyclopedic type of collection across lots of different sort of subject areas. We have about 1.3 million objects in total. And I won't dwell on collections because my colleagues will tell you more about their particular areas shortly. So the next few slides, I'm not going to read them all out, but just for you to kind of have a look at, give a kind of overview of Leeds Museums and Galleries, and particularly what we've been doing in the last year, which of course has been a very exceptional year, not like any other. So in the past, we would usually welcome between about 1.3 and 1.6 million people in person to our sites. And obviously that was much lower in the last year, but we did open every opportunity we could around the national restrictions. And we have a really strong learning programme, also community engagement programme, and as this slide outlines, our kind of digital presence as well, through our website, through our social media, through our museums and that podcast. And we've obviously really kind of been quite reliant on our digital in the last year and have tried lots of new things. So we've launched a new online shop. We also launched our collections on Google Arts and Culture. And more recently, for anybody who's interested in our natural science collections, as Claire or Milo might mention later, we've also just put some of our data on a website called GBIF. So if anybody's got that area of focus. This the next few slides just give an overview for you of some of the previous projects that have taken place as part of our cross-disciplinary fund work. And the original idea of the scheme was just essentially to bring together areas of our collection and subject specialist curators within our service, and academics from a wide range of disciplines. I suppose we started out with the idea that it would be really great to perhaps move beyond subject areas that we might more naturally focus on, for example, with history. Not that we're excluding any historians, if there's anybody on the call, but to really kind of look at ways and areas of collaboration that might be beyond those you'd perhaps normally expect with a museum service. So we've done this for a few years now, and we've been kind of tweaking it as we've gone along, as Erica and my colleague John, who's our partnerships coordinator, can also speak to. So I think hopefully it's got to the point where it works quite well, and the applications must be made jointly. So one of our colleagues applying jointly with somebody from the university, and that may be one or more colleagues from the university. I think the other thing to mention is that we have areas of work that we're sort of broadly interested in and cut across specialist collection areas. So they would be about unpicking colonial histories within our collections. This year, the collection is 200 years old. So they're very much there within the collection, and we want to bring those to the fore. More broadly, diversity and inclusion, and also issues relating to the climate emergency, which obviously concerns us all. So projects which might kind of touch upon those themes would be really interesting to us. Colleagues, I think in the information that was circulated, outlined their particular areas of interest currently as well. And they may be able to answer specific questions in the breakouts, but also may perhaps touch on those in their little introductions that we'll do shortly. So as you've been seeing on the slides, the funding can cover that kind of range of things. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's enough to kind of get a project going and perhaps lead to a bigger bid in the future. So I don't know if there's anything specifically, Erica or John, that you'd like to mention about the application process before we move on at this point.
I've got some things that I'll just talk to regards eligibility from our side, but if John has anything from your side to add first, maybe it makes sense to do that.
I think we've sort of covered most of the points for us. It needs to be a partnership, so do involve the curator kind of in the development of the idea, and I think we'll be asking for some very light touch feedback during the course of the projects that we approve, which we want to kind of keep in balance with the level of funding, so kind of make it helpful rather than oppressive, and hopefully the amount of money is enough to kind of be interesting and useful, but not so colossally huge that if things do go belly up, that it wrecks any careers or anything like that. So we kind of look forward to people kind of actually feeling they can take a chance on being imaginative.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a really important point to make about opportunity to try things out, opportunity to have a bit of development space. What was on one of Yvonne's slides, but that she didn't specifically refer to, that I will draw attention to, is the amount of money available. So we can, oh, thank you very much, there we go. We hope to make, obviously the number of awards depends on how much people apply for. We hope to award between 4 and 6 projects, and that will be probably between £1,000 and £1,500 each. You can apply for smaller projects, but what previous experience has shown us is that many colleagues will be aware there's only so much you can do with less than, say, £1,000. But happy to discuss anything with anybody if you want to check that out. The other point for me is around eligibility. As in the information that's been circulated, you need to be a University of Leeds researcher, and we welcome any career stage is fine. If you're a PhD student, you can't be the lead applicant or the PI in university speak. You need to work with a colleague or colleagues who can have their names down as lead applicant on the application. And whoever is the lead applicant needs to be on a contract, research contract at the University of Leeds that doesn't end before your project ends, which seems like an obvious point to make, but that's within our T's and C's. I know that I'm talking to colleagues from right across the university and that there will be different nuances in different faculties that I probably can't cover all in one go, but I am really happy to talk to anybody who's got a query with regards eligibility. We can do that on a case by case. Happy to talk to you at the end of the main session, or if you want to drop me an email afterwards about the specifics of your case, then really happy to have those as well. The fund is open from well, realistically open from tomorrow when we have a chance to email the application form around. It's a very light touch application form, and it closes on the 22nd of January. So there's quite a few weeks to get some work done on that. And I think that's all I want to say about the specifics of the application form and so on. We will, everybody who's in the meeting now and everybody who has registered an interest that couldn't actually attend today, we will circulate the application form, the guidance again, and a recording of this event so that people can access that after today. I think what I'd like to do now is hand over to Scott and Kitty, and they can talk about their practical experience and make it all come alive a bit more, hopefully. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Could you enable screen sharing? We've just got a couple of slides we want to put up. If that's okay. Hi, I'm Scott McLaughlin from School of Music. Kitty is there somewhere, but of course
I am. Yes, I don't know. I'm Kitty Ross. I'm the curator of Leeds History and Social History for Leeds Museums and Galleries.
Hello. We did a thing in 2019 along with Tom Jackson, who unfortunately can't make it today. So what we're going to do is just walk you through what that was. I'm just going to describe the day as we went into and some of the things we worked with Kitty, and then I'll pass over to Kitty to talk about how it looks from the museum's side of things, and then we can talk a little bit about outputs that came out of that. I guess it's worth saying as well at the moment that this happened in late 2019, so some plans inevitably got pandemicked.
Yes.
We'll talk about the aspirations rather than everything that did or could have happened. Thank you. I have screen sharing. So just to show you two things. This is the flyer for the event that we did. It was music, materiality, and making sense of museum collections. What we went in to do was related to what was then being planned, the Kitty's Sounds of Our City exhibition, which was happening in the
Abbey House Museum.
Thank you, Abbey House Museum.
And it's still on until the end of the year if anyone feels inspired to see it.
Definitely worth a look. What we wanted to do going in, Tom works in the media school, I work in the School of Music, and we sat and we were thinking about how we could interact with these things in the museum, and we knew that the museum had lots and lots of interesting musical objects and musical related things, particularly Abbey House with its collections of historical this and that. There was many musical type things related to that. So one of the things we wanted to do then was think how can we do something that will be both useful to the museum and useful to us. So the idea of this event was that we would go in with a few people. I think there ended up being about 10 or 12 of us all together, and that we'd talk through what things we could do to create some sorts of interactive exhibitions or experiences for people visiting the museum. So the way that we ran the day, we advertised it out, as you can see from what we've got here. But right off the bat, we've said we're looking for people who might be academics, who might be makers, who might be archivists, anyone who's interested in thinking about this particular problem. The day that we had a couple of talks from Kitty and from myself and Tom, just loading the day up, and then we brought out a few specific items from the collection itself: a polyphon, a strovile, a glass piano, and a paper roll organ. And in fact, you can see the glass piano here. So we brought these out, and the idea was then that we split the people up into groups. They could select which of these objects they wanted to mess with. We gave people an hour to develop ideas and come up with an elevator pitch of how they could turn into some sort of interactive exhibition. And then we had some lunch, which was a very good use of the money. And then we let people develop a more fleshed out proposal and do a 5-minute pitch presentation. So that was pretty much the whole day. Encounter the things, get some context, have an open-ended blue skies discussion about how this could be turned into some sort of exhibition. It was really interesting because it brought up all sorts of questions, of course, about what can we let people touch, what can people not touch, how do we make something accessible for people, etc., etc., and then let ideas come out of that. So with that being in mind of what we went in to do, I'll pass over to Kitty now to talk a little bit about how that interacted with the actual collection that you had, and then we'll come back and talk about outputs, etc. after. Kitty?
Yeah, well, it was, as I said, it was a really fascinating day full of lots of ideas of things that I'd never particularly thought of, and some things that, you know, really food for thought for the future, even if we didn't actually end up using them with the Sounds of Our City exhibition. But it was also very useful for sort of just the networking aspect of it. So it was really through this collaborative project, for instance, that Scott put me in touch with students at the university who then helped with one of the recording projects that we did for the exhibition, which was recording some of the sheet music in our collection. So that wasn't something that specifically was connected with this workshop. But it also, you know, I think some of the things that got pandemic were ideas around actual sort of learning workshops and things that we might have done around, particularly there were ideas around the roller organ that you can see there, which actually works as a sort of very basic computer program, really. And there are ways of sort of getting people to program tunes on punch cards and things, which would have worked really nicely, except we couldn't do any of that. So some of these ideas might happen in the future. I think, Scott, you were also talking about the possibility of creating new polyphone discs for modern music that we could play on old polyphones. Again, that's something that hasn't yet happened, but it sounds such a great idea that, you know, we'd certainly be open to doing that in the future. The main thing that actually we did follow on from the workshop was beginning to scope out the possibility of doing a proper sort of analysis of the glass harp, which you saw on the second slide, which is basically an instrument that you play by sort of resonating fingers. It's got a huge number of, it's at the moment, I think all the glasses are in the wrong order, and they're possibly not parts of 2 matching sets. So we had a couple of sessions of actually in sort of evening sessions after people had gone, trying to make recordings and sort of test the actual pitch and resonance of these glasses. And I think that, again, realised, I think, that it was going to be a very large project, so that, again, it's something we'd love to do in the future and hope to get funding to do properly, but it was going to take more than 1 or 2 recording sessions. But as I said, it was full of really bright ideas that also might work in different spaces to Abbey House, where we have quite a sort of specific layout of the exhibition. But you know, there are things that we might be able to do in future. Ideas of using was it sort of resonating tape on the cases and that sort of thing that would allow you to sort of actually interact with, even if you couldn't touch the music, you'd actually be able to create music sort of on the outside of glass. I can't remember exactly what that substance was, because it was all technology beyond my my imagination.
Yeah, I'm also trying to remember. I've just put up a couple of images there of
some of the
polyphony.
other machines that we had. Yes.
I don't think these are ones you actually have in your collection, although one on the left looks very
I
familiar.
think,
But it's
they
basically
possibly
a
were.
metal
I think they
disc.
were the ones that we possibly. Yeah, they look similar to what we've got. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But it was
Can't
really
actually remember.
fascinating it was really fascinating to come in contact with these things, because I had never seen a polyphon or even come across one before we got a chance to look around the collection. So having a guided walk around the space where you've got all these things in the main sorry, what's the name
Discovery
of the
Discovery Centre. Yeah.
That's it, the Discovery Centre. God, 2019, so long ago. Walking around the Discovery Centre and just being able to see all of these things and be able to think, oh, that's something we could talk about. Could we do something with this? How would we get this out? And we had quite a few technologists in the team who were thinking in terms of, well, we could make a plastic version of this embedded with sensors that you could then touch and it would play back the sounds. We did, as Kitty said, have one colleague who was particularly interested in for artistic purposes in recording the sounds that the glass piano could make and then be able to turn that into a sample instrument. That's something that we're still thinking of. That's very doable, just a matter of finding the time, etc. And I think in terms of other outputs, as Kitty already mentioned, we had the random additional output that we ended up approaching one of the student choirs in the music school to do some recordings that went into the exhibition. So that was a really nice serendipitous moment. But I think the most interesting thing maybe was about the networking aspect, that most of us as academics and makers and artists had never really had the opportunity to either see a lot of these things, understand where they come from, understand their relationship to the city and the history, but also to think about them in terms of their museumness, of what they need in the museum, how the levels of distance, etc., that we need to have, how we can document them, and how we can still turn them into something that has some sort of relationship with their actual physical materiality, even if we can't let the public walk around with them. Kitty, anything you want to add?
No, I think that was that sums it up beautifully, and I think also it was just really great fun. You know, even if a lot of ideas may have been sort of beyond what we could really work up into something, it just they sparked thoughts, and so sometimes they evolve into something possibly slightly simpler than what people, you know, the bigger ambitious plans that people have. But
yeah, I think
something real can come out of it.
I think if it hadn't been for the pandemic, the links that we created would have been acted on more quickly, and that we could have built some things up into prototypes, actually tried some stuff out, and hopefully actually this event itself has been useful in just rekindling this, and we're going to try and come back to a couple of things.
Absolutely. And once the exhibition is over, the objects are back in store and actually in a sense more accessible to academics to look at them. When they're in a display, it's more difficult to allow you that for close access to things.
I think that's all we've got.
I think it is, yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, both of you. I think that's a really great nutshell explanation of a collaboration and reflections on its impact on the from the museum side and also from the research side. And it sounds like there's plenty more to go at as well. I like Kitty's comment about having to do that funnel thing where you have loads and loads of ideas, but then you have to kind of filter them down a bit. Scott, I know, needs to get off to something else, but so if anybody has a quick question for him, do you want to raise your hand and we'll take it now? Otherwise, we'll let Scott go to his next commitment.
Just while people are thinking, if they are thinking, it just also occurs to me that point you were making, Yvonne, about historians, that of course part of the pitch we were sending here was that none of us were historians. None of us could look at these objects and do something in terms of historical scholarship with them. We were all very much about practical use. So trying to turn that into something that we could use as opposed to studying these as objects themselves was a really interesting enterprise in itself.
Yeah, that's a great reflection, as Yvonne and John have both reflected on at the beginning. It's not necessarily about the obvious connections. This cross-disciplinary fund, it's more about the unexpected. And so with that in mind, do I don't know, John or Yvonne, if you're which of you is emceeing the next bit, but I'd like to hand over to you both to so that we can hear from the curators who we've got on the call. I wanted to say as well that there are curators who couldn't make it today who are still available to participate in this project. And that includes Kat Baxter, who is a curator of archaeology, looks after Coastal Abbey, and also the costume curators, Natalie Raw and Vanessa Jones, who can't be with us today, but are happy to talk to researchers about prospective collaborations. So John and Yvonne, over to you.
I'm not sure if we decided a fixed order for the curators to do their spiel, but I'm trying to find, there is an email which had this on, but probably if we start with Claire and natural science.
Hi everybody, hello, I'm Claire Brown, I'm Curator of Natural Science. I look after all of the natural science, so that's the geology and the entomology as well as everything else, but I'm going to leave entomology to Milo, who's on this call, so he can chat to you about it. But I wanted to talk to you about the rest of our collections, so hopefully this will work. So this is a whistle-stop tour through our collection. We've got about 800,000 objects, so that's made up of 500,000 mollusks. We've got quite a few mammals, a few thousand birds, lots of insects, huge geology collection, about 26,000 different pieces of geology, really strong in the minerals. Big osteology collection, an ice egg collection, and also a spirit collection, which is all of our alcohol and wet specimens. It's nothing to do with ethereal stuff. It's a designated collection, so that means that it's been recognised by Arts Council England as one of the most important and culturally valuable collections outside a national museum in the country, and that's the entire collection, including the entomology and geology. We've got some absolute treasures in it. So this is a Carolina parakeet, which is an extinct bird. We've got quite a few extinct animals. This is our collection of dodo bones. I'm just sort of running through the highlights because I can't do 800,000 individual objects for you in 5 minutes. So just take this all as a sort of surface level view. This is a Tasmanian tiger or thylacine, another extinct animal. And then we also have interesting objects in from a social history point of view. So this is Grandma the not a tiger, obviously, Grandma the panda, who was the first panda to ever arrive on British soil in the 1930s, and she ended up, bless her, only living 10 days at London Zoo, and then she was bought by Leeds. She's with us on display at City Museum. We have this very, very large Bengal tiger. He's up at the City Museum and the subject of lots of discussions about British Army's officers in the Raj. The average collection of an English officer at the time of the Raj was 200 tigers each. So he's one of them. We have a large customs and excise collection. So anything seized at ports and airports around the country, instead of being incinerated, are sometimes offered to museums. So we have a large collection of objects that are traded illegally around the world. This is Mock, who was a gorilla at London Zoo and has a very interesting heritage, being caught in the wild in the Congo and then moved to this country through London Zoo and finally to Leeds in the 1930s. And an artist called Stuart Drazelian, who illustrated some of Rudyard Kipling's books, was sketching animals at London Zoo and also sketched a mock while he was alive. So I quite like this as a sort of example of things that we have as backup to all of our objects. So lots of big historical archives of all sorts of different notebooks and things associated with the objects. We have a large botany collection, so 150, 200,000 sheets of dried plants, fungi, lichen, bryophytes, that kind of thing. A lot of them are from Leeds and show the history of Leeds wildlife, you know, from the last 200 years, including all the pollution data and you name it, is all locked up inside that. And one of the previous projects on this was looking at what we could find out from our hop specimens by sampling them. Huge mollusk collection with a lot of types in it, so type specimens are the particular physical objects that someone who is naming something for the first time attaches the scientific name to, and so they're very precious and can't be replaced, and we've got site specimens in the collection. And finally, those are my contact details, but I'm sure they're available elsewhere as well. But that was a whistle-stop tour through the natural science collections here. Thanks.
Thank you. Shall we move straight on to Milo then, to keep the natural history theme going? Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to share yours?
Oh, if you've already got it there, yeah, it's probably easier. It's only one slide.
Just a moment, then.
So yeah, as Claire said before, so she looks after the whole natural science collection. I look after specifically the insects and the entomology collection, which is thousands of bugs that we've got hidden away from all over the world. A lot of them from the UK. I think stronger collections for things like native butterflies and moths, but also lots of collections that have been brought, you know, over time, collected from all around the world and put together in some really interesting cabinets and groups, which is cool. We've got a good mix of scientific sort of research collections, some of which used to belong to places like the University of Leeds, as well as lots of collections that were amateur or, you know, enthusiast collections that were put together by people who enjoyed having insects and collecting insects for their own study or their own interests. They're more like, they're a bit showy. They're put together more as sort of a thing to look at rather than a thing to use for study. So there's a good combination there of sort of rich natural history data in terms of, you know, where these objects are from, where the insects were collected, who collected them, what time, and things like that. But also really interesting sort of social angles to it. So the people that were involved in their collection, the routes they took around the world and how they got to us, and stuff like that as well. So it has a good range, stretching back almost 200 years, I think. So far, the oldest insect I've found in our collection, because we're still sort of going through it and discovering things, was a specimen, a large copper butterfly, which used to be all over the UK, went extinct for the first time in about the 1850s. So we have a specimen from 1837, which is about 180 years old, which is pretty great because it's been nicely sitting in a drawer in one piece, which is pretty impressive. We also, so at the moment, the collection is sort of the focus of the Dead Inspiring project which I'm running, which is using this collection of insects to inspire and engage young women to even get involved with natural science and STEM. Running or hoping to run a lot of cool workshops and putting this collection to use, getting it out of the stores and sort of finding the stories and the interesting bits of it, and hopefully getting some kids to sort of see science and entomology for how cool it is, and sort of get into it more themselves, which is very fun. Yeah, I mean, Claire covered a good deal of sort of why the natural history collection in general is really strong at Leeds, being designated and being just so large. And the insects obviously are my favorite bit, because we've just got all sorts hiding in there. Lots of very fun things that I also couldn't, you know, or I could have filled slides with, but we don't have enough time. Lots of interesting extinct insects, as well as more modern collections that give a good idea of things like range shifts and where populations used to live and where they live now and stuff like that. So lots of really cool opportunities for looking at different things within the collection based on the different data that we've got locked away there at the moment. Other than that, we're currently sort of working through digitizing it. That's a big focus of the Dead Inspiring project, making sure that it's as accessible as possible. Like Yvonne mentioned, we're sort of working towards getting this data on things like GBIF. And actually the picture in the top right of the screen is an example of when we were lucky enough to get a scanning electron microscope up from the Natural History Museum and start imaging some of our collection like that. This is mostly for workshops and things, but a really cool way to sort of explore the collection through means that we don't normally have available to us. So all sorts of fun things going on with it, and lots of cool stories and opportunities, I think, sort of hiding in our drawers. Yeah, and if you have questions, or if you don't have time to obviously chat at the end of this, then my email and Twitter are down at the bottom if that's an easier way to get in touch with me.
Thank you. kind of moving along my screen. Next one, John McGoldrick, are you okay to talk?
Yeah, that's a matter of opinion, but I'll try, yeah. Hi, I'm John McGoldrick. I'm a Curator of Industrial History at Leeds Industrial Museum. Yeah, likewise, we have a designated collection. It's mainly the textile, the engineering, and the railway locomotive collection that are part of that designation. In terms of standout objects, we've got the world's oldest surviving self-acting mule, which is quite a treasure. We've also got the world's oldest surviving railway locomotive model. So there's a couple of real gems in the collection. We're also kind of focused on trying to tell the stories through the humans who worked in the industry and not just the traditional kind of top-down narrative that the industrial museums have kind of tended to specialise in. We're also trying to look at different ways of addressing technology and addressing engineering within our displays. In 2019, we redisplayed our small engines gallery. We've renamed it Powerhouse, and we started looking at engines rather than a kind of a serried rank of different kind of iterations of the internal combustion engine. We wanted to start talking about issues like climate change and what was the future of the internal combustion engine. So we want to do a lot more based on that, and we realised that we're kind of almost too close to our collection. So I certainly, personally, I feel that way sometimes. So it's great that people can come in from different perspectives, not just historical perspectives, and actually kind of pull out different kind of aspects to our collection. One of those aspects is design, and you see the slide, part of the image on the right. It's of a beam engine that was designed by Benjamin Hick, who learned his trade in Leeds in the early 1800s, and he designed one of the beam engine for Tower Works, and it's based on, obviously, Tower Works based on the Temple of Horus, and they took the Egyptian styling right down to even the design of the governor on the beam engine. So there's all sorts of kind of angles, and design is one of those particular angles. We also have one engine in our collection that was designed by Benjamin Hick, and it has a much less kind of extravagant Egyptian style and some of the kind of sun disk motifs in the engine. So that's one particular angle that we could always pursue. We have a lot of archives in the collection that kind of provide a real insight into the workings of companies, their different preoccupations, whether that was business practice or whether it was marketing. The Blakey's malleable castings archive is a particularly good one. They made shoe protectors or segs, and so basically you'd never see these things. They were stuck to the bottom of your shoe. If you're old enough to remember wearing them in the late 70s, like I did, they were something that kind of made people's shoes last longer. And that this collection's got around about 300 items of kind of pre-digital paste up. So taking an original drawing or a photograph and kind of working that right through to the finished piece of packaging is something that it provides us a real insight into the practice of the design department and how companies like that wanted to present themselves. Another archive, John Fowler, we have a really rich archive, mainly of photographs of the products. You may be aware that John Fowler's archive is down at the University of Reading, the Museum of English Rural Life, and our particular archive really complements that. Fowler's were pretty instrumental in revolutionising British agriculture in terms of applying steam power to it. They also have a very potent colonial sort of story to unearth. They supplied locomotives to sugar plantations in Cuba while they were still using slave labour. So there's lots of stories that are yet to be unearthed on that front. Another particular archive that might be worth looking at, we're based Armley Mills, and that mill was run by the Bentley and Tempest, or Stuart Tempest to start with, from 1890 to 1872. The collection is incredibly rich. They're a really small company who kind of resisted amalgamation stubbornly right up until 1972. They seem to do all right on that, and they kind of the archive demonstrates various attempts by the company to innovate in terms of machinery, but also how they expanded the site to kind of cope with the competition that they were facing at the time. And one final archive potentially to look at, and this is kind of partly going to be brought within the Slavery and Steam project that's been recently announced by the White Rose Consortium. Robert Hudson and company supplied light railway solutions right across the world. If you wanted a railway building, you just told them where and what kind of gradients and what kind of material you were pulling, and they would provide the solution for you. The locomotive on the right is the kind that was supplied to sugar plantations, and the image on the left is from a railway building project in Portuguese West Africa, currently now Angola, which used coerced labour in the 1920s. So slavery is not just a 18th, 17th, 18th and 19th century story. So surprising stories that can come out of the industrial collection. And that's my contact details. And if you've got any questions, I'm open to any proposal, however left field, and you know, the more creative minds we've got on the collections, the better. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, John. I think next on my screen would, if you can stop screen sharing, grand. Next on my screen is Kitty.
Yeah, I'm Kitty Ross. I haven't actually done a PowerPoint for my collection, partly because it's just so broad. It just covers everything really that doesn't fall within other collections. So I'll just sort of so really, my remit is to cover objects related to the history of Leeds. So a lot of the sort of local history collections that aren't covered by things like the industrial collections that John's just described, or aren't costume and textiles. So it really is everything that falls within, that doesn't fall under other curators, tends to be among the social history collections. If it was dug up in the ground, then it's archaeology and is part of something that Kat Baxter looks after. So just please, if you've got any idea of any sort of collections that you might want to work with, just let me know. As well as sort of things that are very specifically related to Leeds, we have historically a very strong toys and games collection. So we've just redeveloped the childhood gallery at Abbey House Museum to get more of that out. Within that, because we are Leeds, we do have the Waddington Archive, which is one of my favourite bits of the collection, which actually is several thousand games, card games, jigsaw puzzles printed in Leeds by Waddingtons, and they cover subjects that fit in with almost anything. Another very odd collection, which just for historic reasons is part of the Leeds collections, is we have the Henry collection of Sweepiania, which is almost anything that you could think of that's related to the history and medical concerns and imagery connected with chimney sweeps. So a lot of that just has very little local interest, but it's a nationally important collection that we actually hold within Leeds Museums and Galleries. We've also got a very important suffragette archive connected with Leonora Cohen, who was a suffragette. And the projects that I'm working on currently myself at the moment, you've heard a little bit about Sounds of Our City exhibition, which is about music. That comes out in December. Our next exhibition at Abbey House is called Curious Creatures. So we're actually working very closely with Claire and Milo because it's looking at Victorian attitudes to animals. So we're including a lot of the historic taxidermy collections, but also looking through our social history collections and imagery about how Victorians related to animals, whether as vermin or hunting them or setting up things like the RSPCA and RSPB. So really wide-ranging exhibition. And the exhibition that we're proposing for 2023 will be around sport and play and competitiveness in Leeds. And I'm also working a lot to look through our historic photographic collection. We have a really important collection of local photographs and wider, going back to some of the earliest daguerreotypes taken in Leeds. We've got the daguerreotypes of 6 mayors that were taken in the 1840s, which are really, you know, amongst the earliest photographs out there. And we're trying to get a lot more of that digitized and put onto the Leodis website that the libraries run, so that we're integrating our collections there with what is in the library collections and building up the local history side of things there. So yeah, we do have a lot of really interesting photographic collections as well. But just if it's any particularly any subject under the sun, do ask whether or not we've got anything in the collection, and we'd be happy to sort of make it available.
Thank you, Kitty.
Thank you.
Next on my screen is Adam. You okay to speak, Adam? Ah, excellent. And I have a slide for you. Would you like me to share it on your behalf?
Yes, please, if you could.
Okay. There.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, so it's just one slide from me. So hi everyone, my name's Adam Jaffa and I'm the Curator of World Cultures for Leeds Museums and Galleries. So I'm just going to do a kind of rattle through of the World Cultures collections, which is about 14,000 objects, the majority of which are stored at Leeds Discovery Centre. So in Leeds, we call the collection World Cultures, but in other institutions, it's referred to as anthropology, ethnology, ethnography, living cultures. I'd say the collection is mainly made up of non-British items from the mid to late 19th and 20th century. I'd say about 50% of my work involves collections, objects, and then the other 50% involves working with communities. So that might be diaspora communities in Leeds, or it could be source communities in other parts of the world. That's been largely done remotely, although we do host visits, international visits of communities coming to look at collections when it's feasible. So the slide that you have on your screen shows all the countries that objects have come from. And some of the objects we have very detailed biographies and research notes, while others have very minimal information. The good news is that about 80% of the collection has been photographed, so I can share collections images quite easily, thanks to the kind of documentation work that's been done on the collection historically. So as is common with many anthropological collections, the objects have come into Leeds in a kind of variety of different means. And these include objects which are military campaign trophies, objects that were collected by missionaries, objects which were collected by colonial officials. So for example, the first honorary curator of World Cultures in Leeds was a colonial officer in Nigeria. So he donated his personal collection and he gave it to Leeds in the 1950s. We've also got objects that were collected by doctors working overseas, teachers working overseas, and tourists. And then lastly, we've got quite a lot of institutional transfers by smaller museums which were rationalising their collections. So they gave their world cultures collections that they didn't know what to do with to Leeds. And we've also got transfers from places like the University of Leeds. So we had a big anthropology transfer from University of Leeds, I think in 2013. So some of the first items that were acquired in the early decade come from the early decades of the Leeds Literary and Philosophical Society. And this was the founding organisation of Leeds City Museum from 1822 onwards. And these include objects collected from Africa and from the Pacific. However, I'd say the bulk of the collection was built up from about the 1960s onwards. And from the 1970s, there'd been attempts to work with local communities who have come to Leeds from abroad, especially those from South Asia and the Caribbean. So this is the kind of collecting that involves working with building up relationships with communities and acquiring objects to represent the heritage of Leeds. So the kind of strongest collections in world cultures are from Asia and Africa. So the Asian collections are the most numerous, and they total just over 4,000 objects. They include Japanese armour, Middle Eastern metalware, Indian costume and jewellery, Hindu theatre masks and shadow puppets, and smaller bronze Hindu and Buddhist religious sculptures. Leeds' collection also has a good range of Himalayan religious items and costumes from Tibet and Nepal. And these were collections that were built up by two previous curators on separate occasions, both of whom travelled to Nepal and kind of amassed the collections, which went on display fairly recently at Loverton Hall as part of an exhibition looking at Himalayan culture. So the African collections, yeah, there's about 3,000 objects. Leeds used to have an Africa gallery at the City Museum, and they are mostly sub-Saharan and have their strengths in English-speaking West, East and Southern Africa. The strongest, or the kind of most numerous group rather, is weapons. There's about 500 ethnographic weapons from sub-Saharan Africa. Again, there's about 500 examples of costume and body ornaments from Africa, and over 200 examples of sub-Saharan African sculpture and masks. We've also got quite a good collection of African musical instruments, particularly drums and percussion items. If we move down in terms of kind of quantity, the collections from the Americas number around 1,300 items, and this includes a wide range of North American beadwork, clothing and weapons, model canoes and kayaks, and a large wooden, bent wooden chest, which you can see on the slide here, made by the Haida people of the Northwest Coast. So there's quite a small but interesting range of material from the Amazon rainforest, particularly items from Brazil, Guyana and Ecuador. This includes a feather headdress, some war clubs, bead, seeds and tooth ornaments, a good selection of Amazonian basketry, and also a shrunken head. Peru is also quite well represented by archaeology, and that's mainly in the form of pottery from the ancient Moche, Chimu and Nazca cultures. So the museum doesn't have a huge collection of Pacific materials. There's about 1,000 objects from the Pacific. Best represented are Australia, New Zealand and Papua New Guinea. So Leeds holds a large collection of boomerangs and spear throwers from Australia, but also a good selection of shields and ritual items from Central Australia. The Papua New Guinean collections include basketry and feather masks, pottery and costume, while Polynesia is much less well represented, although there is a good selection of modern Polynesian bark cloth and imitation cotton prints. So finally, there is a small collection of what used to be called European folk art or folk items. And these include some important Scandinavian objects, mainly costume, and a good selection of objects from the former Yugoslavia and Greek costumes. So the Yugoslavian objects are from the 20th century, and then we have a few nice pieces of Greek costume from the 18th century in world cultures. So just to finish off, as Yvonne mentioned earlier on, we've got a few areas that we're kind of currently working on, which you might want to tie into, although don't feel obliged. So some of the areas over the next couple of years that I'm looking at are donor biographies and object provenance research, particularly of African objects. And this is because I'm involved in quite a large project with other non-national museums across the UK, looking at linking up African communities in the UK and overseas with African collections. So that's one of the areas I'm working on. I'm generally interested in colonial histories across all the collections, so not just Africa, but the other areas that we have material from. And finally, to finish on, as it were, I'm looking at differing approaches to death and dying as represented in the collection. And this is in preparation for an exhibition at Leeds City Museum on death and dying in 2024. So that just concludes world cultures for you. So yeah, do get in touch if there's any areas you think you might be able to tie into.
Thank you. I think that leaves Catherine. You good to talk?
Yeah, good, thank you. I also don't have a snazzy presentation, sorry. So my job is slightly different to that of my colleagues in that I'm a project curator, so I work across our collections depending on what the project demands. So the project I'm going into next year, I'm just in the preparation phase at the moment, is looking at Leeds sporting heritage. So broadly, we're looking to get a more inclusive representation of Leeds sporting heritage across our collections. As I say, I'm kind of at the preparation stage at the moment. We have a project placement who is running a scoping exercise to understand kind of what is currently in our collections. But from kind of a brief look on our database, we have a category that says sport, and that has about 1,100 objects in it at the moment. And within that, there are things relating to kind of toys and gaming, as Kitty has said. There's things to do with cricket, croquet and tennis, some bicycles, quite a lot of ephemera linking to local football clubs. And all of these things are kind of from the late 19th century, early 20th century. Then further into the 20th century, there are some kind of more disparate bits and pieces, kind of looking at like sportswear. There's some protective equipment for skateboarding, some 1980s football boots, some boxing gloves from Nicola Adams, as well as another boxer as well, and a couple of items relating to the Paralympics. So there's a wheel from a wheelchair that was used in wheelchair rugby. But yeah, in terms of kind of how we're looking to develop those collections once we've got an understanding of what we already have, again, that's kind of something that I'm shaping at the moment, but I think that broadly we're looking to kind of potentially make some acquisitions, but there is limited space. So then also kind of doing further research into our existing collections to understand maybe what representation of sport there is that we don't already know about, or just to understand those collections more deeply. Then kind of looking at digital assets, so maybe kind of making films and photography of sporting activities in Leeds at the moment. So, you know, things like skate parks or local basketball teams, and finding ways to link up with digital culture in that way. And then kind of, I suppose, linking to that, like public outreach and outputs. So again, there's probably some digital things we can be doing, and artworks and stuff like that. I appreciate that sounds a little vague, but as I say, we're kind of in the development process at the moment, so kind of open to lots of ideas. I did send through a list, so I imagine people have seen it anyway, but kind of just roughly some of the ways that we're thinking in terms of making the collections more inclusive in terms of the areas that we might look at rather than the outputs. So on that list, you know, I've said the general history of sport in Leeds. Obviously that's huge, but we're open to it. Anything to do with technology linked to sporting activities, so that might be, say, adaptive technologies for disability in sport, things to do with materials and clothing design and how that has maybe changed or enhances sport and things like that. As I say, like contemporary sporting activities in Leeds, and then anything to do with kind of gender identity and sport and how, you know, how sport is or isn't representative of gender, or how some people's gender identity comes through in sport and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of a rough outline of the project. But yeah, I hope that's okay.
Thank you, Nicola. Shall we go back to Erica now to discuss how we're going to handle the remainder of the programme, which I think is setting up the breakout rooms?
Yep, that's great. Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody for their contributions there. Really great to hear. And I know Rebecca is squirreling away behind the scenes, allocating people to the curator that they've said that they would like to talk to. I have asked Rebecca if when she's done that, she can just put in the chat different slots. So what we'll do is allocate you a one-to-one slot with the curator that you have nominated. If yours isn't the first slot, can I ask you please don't connect from the call, just in case. Of course, feel free to stay muted and camera off until the time of your slot. But also, if you want to come into the meeting and ask any questions or make any comments or observations generally about the scheme or about collections, myself and John and Yvonne will be in the main room and really happy to chat with you. The slots are 10 minutes in length. We don't expect you to have a project nailed on in that time. It'd be brilliant if people do, that's fine, obviously, but we recognise that it's just a starting conversation, hopefully enough time for you to see if there's an idea that is has mutual interest enough to have legs to make an application that you can follow up on later. I think that's all I wanted to say. If there are any general questions before we all break, if anybody has one, please raise your hand and we can take it while everyone's together. Doesn't look like it. Oh, wow, Rebecca, amazing. Okay, in the chat are the slots. Curators with slots. Rebecca will ping you all off to a breakout room. We will, once your appointments run out, we will bring you back. Somebody else is speaking. Am I talking over you? Rebecca, go on, sorry.
I just say imminently, it's just going to start pinging people.
Okay, you'll just go. So that's fine, great. And anybody who hasn't yet chosen someone, if you do want to nominate somebody in the next few minutes, then please do so. I think we've got space for everybody, so do just let us know. And yeah, have great conversations with your chosen curator. Thank you again for your interest in the scheme. Tomorrow we'll be in touch with a recording of this event, the application form, the guidance material. Please do send it on to colleagues that you think might be interested that haven't registered for today's event. And our email inboxes are open to talk with you about any issues. So I think I'll stop now because people are going to start pinging off. So I'll stop talking. Oh, it's happening. Oh, you can see more than one person as well. I've just seen the latest comment in the chat. If we've got availability, yes, you can see more than one person is fine. Oh, Cultural Institute mascot. Wow, well done, Rebecca. That's the heart-stopping bit.
Just realised, I was like, oh God, everyone's names. Just type them in manically.
Can I X this pop-up? It's not going to ruin anything, is it? As long as I don't click close all rooms, it's okay, isn't it?
Yeah, you're fine.
Roger that.
Should we stop the recording now?
Yes. Oh yeah, probably a good idea.